Welcome to the Vortex of Gemini, a portal of in-depth curiosity and endless possibilities. In each episode, I take you through a tunnel of emotions, sensations, and information. And in this tunnel, my intention is that not only our intellect, but all of our energy bodies are open to what we experience here. The mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual body. Try listening with all of them and see what gets activated within you. I'm your host. My name is Paulina, and I'm a 4/6 human design manifester ready to activate people. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of my Curious podcast, where I just dive into any topic that fuels and sparks my curiosity. Today, I want to talk about a topic that has been on my mind since I was a child. So, we all have gone to school, luckily. I bet that everyone listening right now is privileged enough to have gone to school. And I really mean it. It is gold that we all have gotten to receive an education of some sort. Now, you can probably sense that there is a but coming in all of this. And there is, because yes, it is a blessing. But I also feel that times are a-changing and we need to start reviewing what we learn in school. Like, what is important? Why do we learn what we learn? And what skills do we actually need as a society? Do we all need the same sets of skills? I'm not so very sure about that. But first, I thought I would jump into my school experience because that's all that I really know, right? We can all go back and contemplate upon our school journeys. I have had, again, the privilege of going to school in several countries. So I started school in the United States. I started kindergarten and I was really enjoying it. And in the United States, you already start learning about numbers and letters. So you actually have dedicated classes to learning things. I remember learning spelling. I even remember going to computer class. And this was back in 1994. So you can imagine the kinds of computers that were in that classroom. They were huge. The screen was in color though, so that's quite cool. I went to primary school in Sweden and I went to high school in Sweden and the United States. So the first part of my school journey was in Sweden and the United States. Then I pursued higher education, and that was in Sweden, in France, in Denmark, and in Canada. So I've been a little bit restless, just wanting to explore. My life is really different now, and I'm really happy that I'm settled and grounded. But I also look back really fondly of those memories. And I'm really grateful for all of my experiences. But ever since primary school, really, I've had big questions in my mind, like, why do we need to learn this? And I think that most kids actually have questions like this. Like I even remember some kids just blurring it out in the classroom like, why do we need to learn this? And I mean, grown-ups can they can just ignore that question and reply in a logical way like, well, because it's in the curriculum, or well, because you might need that piece of knowledge when you're older. Uh, and while that might be true, I feel that this is based on a narrow way of thinking. And that is, you only have this one chance to learn, and that's when you're a kid. Because after, when you're an adult, you're screwed. You can't learn anything new. Which actually is false. Life is a big school. And you know, when you really have to learn something, you will go and learn it. Really. I can just take an example. Interest rates. They don't inspire me. I'm not called to learning about interest rates, but this whole world is filled with interest rates. So I've had to learn to really understand, what is the system? Where is my money going? And yeah, I've learned that in a day. So that was one of my questions that has been with me throughout the school years. The next question I've had has really been a bit of a burden because I was and I am a very creative person. You could say that I'm driven by creativity, and I could even argue that most people are in their own kind of creative way. When I say driven by creativity, I mean arts and philosophy. And the question I've had is, why is school strangling my creativity? And this actually started happening in 7th to ninth grade, it is in Sweden. I really started feeling like I am not motivated. I don't know what I'm doing here. I just want to play music and listen to music. And you know how teenagers are. They're in their own bubble and in their own world. Unfortunately, it just got worse when I started university. As you can imagine, in university, you have a short period of time, approximately 3 months, in one subject, in one course. And in those 3 months, you need to memorize that whole area. And you really need to memorize it, and you need to know it by heart because you need to be able to talk about it freely, write about it from certain angles, and prove that you're an expert in that area in 3 months' time. Now when I'm saying it out loud, it sounds really ridiculous. Who decided that timeline? It seems really short, especially if you want to dive deep into something. I would say that maybe 6 months could be possible. I mean, it totally depends on the topic, but yeah, 3 months is like the standard. And during those years, I mean, I went to university for almost 6 years. There was no art. I can say that. I did not paint. I did not sing very much. I did not sculpt or knit or do anything like that. And I felt quite numb because that is a big part of my personality. Doing things with my hands, like crafting and creating things. And I really noticed a difference when I started having real weekends, when I started my first job, because then there was a clear line like, this is your work time, this is your spare time. This is your free time. Do whatever you want with that. You don't have to do anything that anyone else says. The next question that I thought a lot about is, why are we learning the same things as everyone else for so many years of our lives? I mean, you start specializing in Sweden, you start narrowing things down in high school. There you choose your sort of your major. In the United States, I think it's still quite generic. Like everyone takes sort of the same courses, and then you can pick and choose some courses that are a bit different. So, how many years are we studying the same thing as everyone else? For 10 years? 10 years is a long time. So, 10 years learning exactly the same thing as everyone else in literature class, reading exactly the same books as your whole country is reading. I mean, it's not black and white like that, but roughly that's what's happening. We're molding everyone into one mold, and the people that are free thinkers or naturally good at something outside of this mold feel like they don't belong in here and they don't know what to do. They might feel really lost in this mold, and no one is guiding them elsewhere. I mean, if you're lucky, you have parents that see this, but not everyone does. And yeah, you're left on your own then. The next question that I have is, why is memorization so important? From my experience in the Swedish school system, it's super important to memorize things. Now, that's a good thing if you are a person who can remember everything you hear and everything you read. That was not the case with me. I mean, I remembered, for example, in English class, when we had words to memorize, I could do that because I associated a picture with that word. That's how I memorized. But when it came to things like history, which is a super interesting topic, sometimes you didn't really have the best teacher. If you were unlucky, the teacher had a monotonous voice and the book was just filled with text. And some people are really, really excited over that, like just to plow through a whole book with text. But some people, like myself, need a little bit of color, a little bit of imagination, a little bit of storytelling, and making things exciting. And I didn't know that as a child, so how could I possibly request that? We're not always that self aware when we're kids. This has really dawned on me now. Like, that's the kind of learner I am. And I need to be really curious about something in order to really soak in that knowledge. So that was the memorization. And followed by the memorization is the question of, why is there a strict time limit on tests? I never performed really well on tests unless it was a language, because yeah, naturally that was my gift. That was my what I was naturally good at. But in all other subjects, the time pressure on top of me really put a gray cloud around my memory and my ability to creatively write something or write a really smart answer. So I was a kind of kid that needed more time. I needed more time to feel grounded and secure enough so that I could reach that memory that I had and form a really good answer. And I've thought about this a lot. Like, how often do we as adults need to perform under time pressure? And I could come up with a few times, but for example, when it comes to in your work life, often when you have a deadline, it is a man made deadline. It's not a dead serious deadline unless it has to do with, let's say, transport and supply chain deliveries. But in my work, there was not really that kind of tight deadline. And if I had one, it wasn't like, oh, you have 2 hours to find all of these answers. Like, at least you have a few days or like one day, but that's way more than 2 hours. So I always found that really strange. Like, why is this a thing? The practical reason for why there's a time limit is, of course, that teachers are being paid for a certain amount of hours. And obviously, that teacher can't just sit around all day, probably, for all the students to finish a test. So, in my world, we would need to reframe what a test is. Like maybe this is an outdated version. Maybe this is something that we're done with. We don't need this highly pressured tests for little kids. Now, the next question I've had: why is there so much homework? We spend so many hours in school, almost like a full workday for adults. And then when you get home, you have to continue working. I mean, I can't help but laugh when I'm saying these things out loud because when I do, they don't sound logical to me. It doesn't sound like the school you want to put your kids in. But this is the norm. I mean, some grown-ups take their work home and they continue working home. But I would argue that is a choice. That is a choice you make. You're free. You're free to choose whatever you want. And some people choose to work a lot. But in school, you have no choice. You're forced to do these things. I have one final question that I think about and have thought about a lot. And that is that I remember in school, out of the box thinking was encouraged. However, also not. Because the curriculum is so tight and so fixed, you're taught in the foundations to learn what other people are saying about things. I mean, that is the main chunk of knowledge that you're getting in school. Oh, this man said that. Mostly this man said that, but this woman said that. And once in a while, you will get a task to think outside of the box. But how easy is it really to think outside of the box when the main chunk of the education is based on a mold? In my experience, it was not easy. I mean, obviously, I had my imagination, but most of the time, I didn't dare to go outside of the mold because when it comes to grades, there was a pressure to get high grades. And who would get the high grades if you start writing about something from your imagination? I mean, I didn't think that was possible. So I went the safe route, and that's all I knew. So those were my main questions. And although some of them might seem provocative, I don't really know because they have been inside of me for all this time. I hope that these questions are sparking some kind of thought in you. Do you see the school system as something normal just because it's something that has always been in a certain kind of way? I think it's super interesting to really go outside of the borders. So, in my experience with the school system, I didn't have many difficulties other than the things that I mentioned, like memorizing, time pressure, homework, etc. One could argue that, but Paulina, you shouldn't complain. And as I said, I'm really grateful for my experiences. However, I also see that Just because something has been in a certain way for the longest time, it doesn't have to stay that way because society is constantly moving forward. Technology is expanding. We're expanding how we see the world. So, why shouldn't the structures and the systems also expand? There's one thing that I have been really inspired by in my school experience, and that was my primary school teacher, Regina. She was my teacher for 3 years and from first to third grade. I went to primary school in Kiruna in the northern parts of Sweden, where I'm grown up. And Regina was this kind of old school teacher, the kind that is really strict and sort of disciplined, but the kind of woman that you really have respect to. You really you really want to listen to her and you want to respect her. We were a lot of personalities in my class, really quiet kids like myself, some kids that had a lot to say and couldn't sit still, and I think that's completely normal. That's the way it should be. And Regina had this way of teaching that was really before her time. Remember, this was in 1994 to 1997. And she had a really practical way of teaching us things. Like in each class, there was some sort of arts and crafts involved, there was storytelling, there was activity. I remember a few days a week, we had this cassette with Mickey Mouse and friends, and all the kids just got to dance around and move their bodies. And that was really fun, I remember. Everyone enjoyed it. And in science class, we got to, for example, fill a bucket with snow and leave it in the classroom overnight and then see what happened the next day. And then we talked about the sciencey stuff about the transformation from snow to water. And I remember even the kids that had a hard time sitting still, they were like, they got their needs met because we didn't only sit still. The most important thing that she did with our class was right before lunch. She put on calming music. She turned off the lights or dimmed the lights. I don't quite remember. And all the kids got to pick a spot on the floor to lay down on. And then I think for 2 or 3 songs, we did mindfulness practice. And we got to scan our bodies and then lay there and relax before it was time to go for lunch. And I remember one of the songs that she had. I had a hard time finding this song because I didn't know the name of it. But finally, one day I found it, and it's Yanni Chariots of Fire. And this is a song that is in a few movies, and I associate it with two people running in slow motion towards each other. It's a cool song. And after these songs were finished, our class went in a straight line to the canteen. And guess what? We were the calmest class in the whole school. Everyone was relaxed, and we got to pick our foods and then sit and eat in this blissful state. And then ran out to play in the snow. And I'm super inspired by this because I know how much it did to all of the students in the class. And unfortunately, in Sweden today, I'm not sure if that would be allowed, letting students lay on the floor. I think there would be a lot of parents complaining that their kid is laying on the cold floor with all the dirt. But I would argue that it was the best thing that happened to us. So, super inspired by this. And I know that she she knew something. Maybe she had read something about different methods. I'm really curious about that. Like, did she know about other kinds of schools like Montessori or Waldorf or homeschooling? I don't know. But all these schools that I mentioned, unfortunately, they're all private. They're really for privileged people most of the time that have the money to put their kids into those kind of schools. But my vision and my hope is that the traditional school system, like the public school system, starts opening up more to the possibilities of other methods because kids nowadays, I mean, we have all sorts of needs that need to be met. The thing where everyone has a different kind of learning style, this really needs to be acknowledged and embraced. And I'm just imagining a school where kids can follow their natural curiosity and natural talent, and maybe one part of it can be like something that everyone learns, like the most important parts. But I don't think that that should be the main focus. I feel like we should incorporate more free thinking into the schools and more practical things. Like, what if everyone got to learn how to build a simple hut or like a storage house? Like, wouldn't that be cool if everyone knew how to build something at least? Or learning about your emotions. Like, we all have emotions and we're all meeting people with emotions. So, how to handle that? Learn about heartbreak. Everyone goes through heartbreak of some sort. How to be more emotionally connected. I think these things should be taught in school. Philosophy, a big one. Like, that really ignites the free thinking sparks in your brain. If philosophy was one of the main subjects that you got to learn, I wonder what would come out of it. I mean, from what I understand, philosophy used to be something that everyone learned. These are my thoughts about the school system. And now I'm wondering, after hearing about my thoughts, do you have any stories about where you felt like your needs were not met as a child? As I will keep saying in this podcast, the things that I've shared today are not black and white. I'm not that kind of a thinker. I'm a very much gray zone thinker. So I hope you take everything to heart. I've been speaking from my heart. Yeah, I hope I sparked some curiosity in you in this topic. Next week, I have a super interesting guest in the same theme that we talked about today, and it's from a mother's perspective. So, thank you for listening today. I cannot wait until the day when I really feel super comfortable in this chair. It is a bit of a journey to talk openly like this, but I really am looking forward to practicing this muscle. Have a really nice day. Until next time.